Welcome to the Success with Jewelry podcast, where we invite you inside our conversations about business success and marketing for jewelry designers and entrepreneurs.
We're Laryssa and Liz, jewelry marketing experts with a combined 16 years of experience in jewelry marketing and proven track records in helping jewelry brands meet their goals. When you listen to or watch this podcast, you get an intimate and exclusive peek behind the curtain of all the things you wish you could know about earning success in this industry.
Welcome to episode 70. In this episode, Laryssa and I are going to talk about telling your story. We also want to tell you about our insider community. When you join, you'll have access to extended episodes full of tips that you can start implementing today and further resources about each topic we discuss. In the bonus content of this episode, we'll dig deeper into this topic, and I'll share some thoughts about the trade shows I just attended in New York City. To get access to exclusive content as well as direct access to me and Laryssa, sign up by visiting successwithjewelry.com. Hey, Laryssa, let's get into it.
Let's talk about one of the most important topics in marketing for jewelry businesses.
And this is a topic we could probably do many episodes about, so we'll see what kind of sparks ideas to dive in deeper. But so many brands, I find, even if they have some clarity on their story, really have trouble articulating it to the end consumer.
It's so hard. It's one of the things I hear when I talk to designers, like, oh, okay, that sounds so easy, but why can't I do it?
And I think that part of the reason that they can't do it is because they're not clear on what they want to be saying. And they also feel that they've said it already and they don't need to say it again. And that story isn't infused in everything that they put out there.
Yeah, and the story can kind of be like a living, breathing thing too. I mean, when you start your business, you'll probably have one version of that story, and over the years, it should be enriched and evolve and be added to. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Definitely. So just to kind of get clear about what a brand story is, it recounts the series of events that sparked your company's inception and expresses how the narrative still drives your mission today. And it's important because it helps customers understand who you are and why you're in business.
Mm-hmm. Easy.
So easy. No big deal. But the first thing you want to consider when you are rethinking your story, and I think, I know it's February at this point, but it's still the beginning of the year. When you're kind of entering a new year or you're doing planning or even checking in with it once a quarter, you should look at your story. So now, if you haven't done it yet, is a good time to kind of revisit your story. But the first thing you want to do is make sure you know yourself and know what your brand is.
Absolutely. Yes.
So some questions you could answer are, what is your brand? What do you stand for? And what do your clients want from you?
So should we go into each of those points?
Yeah, let's go into each of those.
So what is your brand? How does someone even approach that question?
I don't know. No, I do. It's hard though, because I have trouble marketing myself. And even though I can market anybody else. And it's funny, I just was in New York City. I helped with a incubator section in New York Now, and there were 12 brands, and it was such a strong community. And these gals were covering each other's booths if people had to go to the bathroom, like how to take a break, grab lunch, things like that. And it's amazing to see how well somebody can sell somebody else's work. And that's not to say they weren't good at selling their own work, but you can just kind of come alive when you grasp somebody else's story. And as an outsider, I think it's easier to tell that story and feel really confident about selling their brand and their product.
That's such a good point. And I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, it's a hard thing to know, right when you start your business. I think, and Liz, you can probably relate to this. I mean, when I started my business, however long ago, almost 8 years now, it was not the same story that I'm telling today. And I needed to go through that period of time to really figure that out.
We're going to get more into this in the extended version of this, but My story has always had the core why, and I think that that's how I've gotten kind of this far, and I've evolved it and I've added to it and I've made it clearer. But the core of my story has been this like mission to support emerging designers. And obviously I've built a lot around that and grown it and gotten clarity, like I said. But it's really hard when you start out. So I think that with this question of what is your brand, starting with that like why you're doing it is the best place to start.
That's so true. That's such a hard question to answer though as well. I mean, we're talking about it as if like, oh, just like know your why. But I think people struggle with that also.
I think they struggle with it, especially in jewelry, because it's not like a vacuum cleaner where you can be like, I've created this to help improve your cleaning habits and make, vacuuming easier or whatever it is. It's like a lot of designers are their why is they just love making. And that doesn't necessarily create a compelling story just at that for the end consumer.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, you can start there, but maybe expand into something that you think the customer will care about. Because it's like the difference between just making jewelry as a hobby, which your why, of course, can be, I just like making it. But if it's going to be a business, it has to be something a little bit more expanded upon than just that.
Right. And so then answering these other two questions of like, what do you stand for? And what do your clients want from you? So, yeah, you love making jewelry, but maybe you make these really interesting one of a kind pieces using gemstones that are just really unique and you have an eye for that. And your clients come to you because they're looking for those unique gemstones. So, kind of understanding all of these things. And then also, what do you stand for? Maybe there's another layer to it where you stand for, like, ethical sourcing or sustainability or something like that. Layering those things all together makes your story much more unique.
Absolutely.
So the second thing that you need to consider once you have clarity on yourself is know who you're talking to. And I know this is a big one for Laryssa.
Well, it just really ties into what we just said. It's like if your why is just centered on you and why you like making, then that inherently means you're not thinking about like who you're talking to. Because in today's like competitive landscape, I mean, most customers are not going to be gripped by you telling them like you just like to make jewelry because there's a lot of people like that out there.
Totally. And I think that a lot of designers have trouble like writing their Instagram caption, writing their emails, because they don't know who they're talking to, or they like kind of, it's like this like gray blob that they think of. And I think that makes it so much harder to write content. And it's so much harder to tell your story if you don't know who you're talking to. So getting clear on this is really important.
Definitely. So, questions you can kind of ask yourself once you're imagining that target customer is like, what does that person value? So, like, what's important to them? Do they like sustainability? Do they like handmade? Or do they like value? Like, things that are like well priced, like whatever it may be, what is that customer value? What do they connect to? Like, are there certain motifs or symbols that they resonate with? And then why would they support your brand as opposed to like XYZ brand?
I think it's good if you're doing direct to consumer events or even like wholesale trade shows, or you're out there in the world, really like understanding why somebody's supporting your brand is like really actively listening, because people say it all the time, and taking that information and writing it down. Like maybe you run into a client and they're like, "Oh, I love supporting your brand because you're so personable and I just get compliments on what I wear when I wear your pieces," or whatever it is. Like writing notes on those things can really help you figure out who that client is, what they're connecting to, and why they're supporting you.
That's a huge way that I learned how to position my business was literally just listening over the years to what people need, what resonates with them the most. And I find the more I lean into that, the more positive feedback I get. So I'm literally just like echoing back like what I hear and what values I have for my business.
Totally. I feel the same way with the Stay Gold Collective. The strongest piece of it for people was the community aspect. And the more I started leaning into that, the more it grew. So listening to your audience can go a long way. And then once you find those brand advocates, the people who are like talking about you, collecting your work, telling their friends about you, you really want to nurture those people.
Absolutely. So how can people find brand advocates though? Like that's another thing that I think people are really unsure about.
I think there's this whole, we talked about outreach last week, but I think that there's this whole like fear of, bothering somebody or asking too much or, but people who love your work are going to love to hear from you. So if they're like posting about you on social media, or if you see them at a show and they're like, I'm always telling people about your work, that's when you want to say something like, oh, well, let's have a conversation. Maybe we can like do an event together, or maybe we can just have coffee sometime or something. I don't know, like think about your bandwidth and what you're trying to do. But I think leaning into those people, following them on social media, responding to their content, sending them a handwritten note maybe a couple of times a year, like a small gift, that really goes a long way.
Absolutely. I love all that. I know we talk about this a lot. I don't know. Yeah, maybe there's a fear that people are think it's too much, but also it's hard to find time to do that.
So hard to find time. It's so hard to find time. But for example, like in New York City, Laryssa wasn't there, sadly, but maybe in August, we did a big meetup. And even having like 5-minute FaceTime with somebody that I'm usually just online with, like
Mhm.
goes a long way. And maybe they're not going to necessarily like hire me or anything like that, but maybe eventually they will because we've met and we've connected on a personal level.
Mhm.
So thinking about how you can do events where you can just, open studio, things that can get people in person with you, little notes and things like that. You can think about kind of more a less time consuming, like minimum way to do it. Just think about what time you do have.
Mhm. Yeah, those are great tips.
So the next thing that you really want to do once you understand who you are and who you're talking to is really lean into your niche. And this is another thing designers kind of shy away from, I think, because a lot of times it's like, oh, well, I want to be everything to everyone, or I want to cater to all these people. I don't want anyone to feel excluded. And I understand that idea, but the more you lean into your niche, the more your brand will grow, the more the support for your brand will grow. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to like get smaller to get bigger, but I've seen it work time and time again.
Yeah, it helps you get so clear on your messaging. Honestly, for us with Joy Joya, if I know a brand has a niche, I'm like more excited to work with them because I think it's so much easier to grow an audience.
I completely agree. And if you're wondering, like, well, what is my niche? I think looking at the intersection of like what is unique about your brand and what your customer is connecting with could help you find that.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, even if it's like, I don't know, your niche is people who like interesting gemstones or something like that, like capitalize on that and really speak to that person.
Yes, and like share not only like, oh, well, this is a rare specimen that I've used in this design. I'll like point out why it's special too. Like, oh, notice this inclusion and this kind of pop of flash of color. That's very unique to this type of stone. So like kind of dumbing it down and bringing them into your world if they don't understand gemstones, if they're not somebody who like is a gem nerd like you are, as passionate about gemstones, you can really show them why it's special.
Yeah, and I think there's this idea like, oh, people don't read. They're not going to sit there and like digest this information. I don't really think it's like about that. You can't like think of it that way because if someone is specifically interested in one product, they will like at least skim the details. And the more richness and passion and like knowledge that you're adding to that, even if they're not sitting there literally like studying whatever you have said, I think it goes a long way.
And you can make it digestible, like, using line breaks and little short paragraphs in your emails and your website and your social media. Like there's ways to make it digestible. And then you could layer in video content where you're maybe doing a voiceover and like pointing and talking and things like that. So I'm so sick of the captions on Instagram and the emails that are so generic. I want to hear you and your voice. We'll get into this more, but I love it. I mean, just being around a lot of designers in person and having them tell me about their work and seeing it in person and their passion behind it, it sells me so much more on them than just some of the stuff they're doing on social media and in their emails and on their website and stuff like that. And it's like, if I could I do this. I try to coach people on how to like meld those two worlds and make sure that their marketing is, what they're saying in person and stuff like that. But it is hard to kind of find that. Um, where am I going with this thought? If people sold their work the way they do in person online, I think a lot of designers would be finding a lot more success.
What do you think is holding them back?
I think there's a disconnect. I think when you're doing it all in your head, I think it's hard. I think when you have that blank page that you need to write on, I think that it's hard. And I think that, for people who haven't been doing marketing for their entire careers, and maybe they're more visual and they're, pros at CAD or pros at their bench work or however they design and make jewelry. I think it's just a different skill set that you need to practice.
Mhm.
And you need to kind of hone in on figuring out your voice and the confidence behind what you're doing. So I think it takes practice and maybe some outside perspective.
I have a little, just came to my head, a little hack for people like that are really good at like talking in person about their brand. Like, so, get an AI transcription tool, like Otter is one that we use. Or I think even in Google Docs, there's like a voice dictation thing, whatever. Find a tool, sit at your computer, pretend you're like having a conversation with Liz at a trade show, and just sit, put a timer for like 30 minutes. And I just want you to like talk about your brand, get excited, have like products in front of you so that you can look at them and be like, oh, well, this product, blah, 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 blah. Dump the whole thing in there. You're going to open ChatGPT. You're going to take that transcript and you're going to say, hey, ChatGPT, this is just like a brain dump about my jewelry business, XYZ. Turn this into like digestible brand story kind of content that I can share. And it will basically give you like your brand Bible.
Yeah, and then you can tweak it or you could have someone else look at it to like, make sure it feels good and still feels like your voice and all of that. But that's a really good tip for like at least a first draft or like to get started or to get some more clarity on it.
Yeah.
Um, and then you can keep tweaking from there. But I love that idea because I think that so many people know what they need to say, know their story, but then just like kind of struggle in how to put it in
Mhm.
writing. And then something else to remember is that it needs to be a part of your whole narrative. So it's not like you share your bio once and then you're done. It needs to be infused into everything that you're doing.
Definitely. There needs to be almost like a little sprinkle of it on top of everything.
Definitely. The last couple of tips I'll share is to one, keep it simple. Because I think that I've run into a lot of designers who are trying to say so many different things. You want to really like focus in on that key messaging and that niche and that core story so that you're not just confusing people with all of these different ideas. The more clear you are, the more consistent you are. We've said this before, the more you'll get through to your end consumer.
Definitely.
And then the last one is to be yourself. Authenticity is everything. Your story should have your voice and your personality. So, like to Laryssa's tip of really like talking and telling your story, and figuring out how to really infuse your voice into it, I think is really important. And you don't want to like just have like a highlight reel. You want to make sure you're telling like your real story because people are going to connect with that.
hmm That just reminded me of a story from my life. When I was like fresh out of school, like grad school, and it was one of my first like real jobs. And I had a friend who was slightly older who was like in the same industry. And I was talking to them, I'm like, I'm so nervous. Like, I don't know how this is gonna go. How do I like make a good impression? Blah, blah. And I'm dumping all my anxiety on them. And they're just like, stop, just be yourself and you'll be good. And that has stuck with me for like, I don't know, 20 years now. Like, no,
That's
not 20 years, but almost.
That's wild. I mean, it's so true. Like you just want to be yourself because you are your brand. I mean, we're talking to a lot of solopreneurs or at the very least people who are like creating their work and like the core of their business or their names on the door. Be yourself because that goes so far.
Yeah, totally. And that doesn't mean you have to like share pictures of like your dinner or like your kids, like whatever that means to you. You know, it doesn't have to be like one version of being yourself. And that's what's cool about that. You get to pick.
And you can create that boundary of like, what are the aspects of myself that I share within my business?
Hmm.
And the more clarity you have on that, the easier it will be to create content.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, are you effectively telling your story? Let us know. Visit successwithjory.com. We'd love to know what you're thinking, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks for being a part of the community.